Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar on Prevent Identity and Privilege Management Mishaps with an Effective Change Management Strategy. My name is Megha and I'm the product expert here at Manage Engine. So the reason we picked the topic for this topic is because we're going to be talking extensively about Active Directory and why. So the first half of the session, I'll be listing out different challenges when it comes to managing changes in Active Directory, the day-to-day administrative duties that you have to perform, and how it can get complex and challenging, and why you need to think beyond native tools to meet those needs. And in the second half, I'll be taking you through a demo of how you can tackle these challenges and then put a proactive or a preventive measures in place so that there are no you know errors or any difficulty with managing your identities and privileges of users in your AD. So the tool that we're going to be discussing today is AD Manager Plus. So AD Manager Plus is an Active Directory management and reporting tool. So this is one of the many tools that we have in our Active Directory suite, and we'll be talking about this tool today. So during the session, if you have any questions, please make use of the chat window and then just let me know what are the questions. So what I'll do is I will take this questions at the end of the session. So we'll just continue with the session, and then if you have any questions in between the session also, please do not hesitate to put those questions in the chat window, but I'll be able to answer those questions only at the end. Right. So moving on to the agenda for today's session. So this is the agenda, and let me quickly start with why I have chosen these topics and why we will be focusing on them for today's session. So managing AD infrastructure is inherently a complex responsibility because there are a number of changes like users being onboarded or moved or promoted or offboarded, and these are quite, they happen on a regular basis, and they often pose as a major challenge for IT teams because sometimes the changes are unexpected and unwarranted, leaving IT administrators scrambling. So to ensure that the objects in your AD are secure, it's essential to have a total visibility into all the changes happening to user accounts and their related attributes, right? So we'll start from each of these cases that I've listed here, and we'll see how we do it in terms like how these challenges are encountered on a regular basis, and what we need to overcome them. And in the second half, I'll be taking each of these cases again, and I'll be showing you a demonstration on how you can do so using AD Manager Plus. So moving on to the first one, protecting AD from unauthorized changes. So AD, making changes in AD permissions, so can be really, can be difficult if it does not go through a review mechanism in the first place, because one thing is it holds the key to managing our the users within your organization, the employees, the resources like the computers, the groups, the printers, all of that. The Active Directory in as a whole is quite critical when it comes to managing the day-to-day operations of your organization, right? At least the IT infrastructure part of it. Now, when you're making changes in AD, we have to be completely conscious about each change that we make. And when you're enforcing a change, it does not cause any harm or any repercussions, right? So unwanted changes or accidental changes that could be damaging to your organization, and then that could also leave chances to insider attacks or external cybersecurity attacks. All of that has to be prevented and avoided as much as possible. Now, when you're making changes in AD, it's better to have them reviewed first, because one thing, if you're having an access control policy in place for every critical action in AD, this will prevent users from gaining unauthorized privileges. So, like I said, the best course of action is to follow a review process. Now, where every user modification request is evaluated by, let's say, the user's manager or someone in the team, and then that particular request, only when it's validated or it's when it's completely approved, then that particular request is being sent to the IT team for execution. Now, let's say any kind of request, such as requesting for access to, let's say, some critical shares or making changes to users group memberships, they must be reviewed by the team manager or team lead before being, actually given to those users. So this way your enterprise resources are not compromised, and if there are any changes that you, or any user modification request that you feel it looks off, or it has to be uh, put in check, then this is where you can enforce a complete control mechanism where none of the actions or none of the operations are causing any harm to your organization. Now, this is the first step, that this is the first scenario that we'll be looking at, and I will be showing you how you can ensure that using AD Manager Plus in the second half, right? So I'll quickly go through the first 6 steps that I have, 5 steps that I've listed here, and then we'll move to the tool. So moving on to the next one. Now, when you're delegating permissions to technicians. So the intent of that is that you reduce the load, and you kind of assign menial tasks to the technicians, let's say resetting password or unlocking user accounts. All of that is fine, but if you're giving certain permissions to technicians and those privileges are misused by technicians, like if you're using the built-in delegation control wizard, so delegation can be tricky in that. Now, when users are granted permissions to perform certain actions in AD, like creating users or resetting their passwords or enforcing, what happens is enforcing necessary restrictions in that also becomes essential. So this is more like you want to make sure that if nothing is out of place and the permissions are not misused by those technicians. So how do you do that? When you're delegating certain permissions to the technicians, you have to ensure that the permissions are specific or are absolutely essential to that particular task alone and nothing more than that, right? So when you're giving permissions for a user to reset a password or create user, how do you enforce that I want that particular technician to have access to edit certain attributes only, or view certain reports only? So that is not possible using native tools. The kind of delegation that is supported in native tools does not really live up to that kind of expectations of when it comes to delegation, at least. Now, I will be giving you a demo on how to configure a completely granular way of giving permissions or delegating to technicians in the second half of the session. Now, coming to privilege creep. So, when users join the organization, the IT administrators grant them permissions to access certain resources, right, which are relevant to their job function. Now, for different tasks or projects over time, what happens is these users might be granted permissions to different resources. And ideally, these access rights should be revoked after the task is complete. Now, it's a good practice for the IT admins to review all the user access rights uh, by role against a checklist of permissions periodically. Let's say when something like this happens, there are chances that the users might have access to top level security groups or critical folders and files that are no longer necessary for that role, right? So periodically tracking the permissions assigned to those users for a specific project and then revoking them after the project is complete will resolve the problem, but that task can be tedious. So what can you do? What is the solution to this? Now, when you're granting permissions, you have to ensure that the permissions last, or the permissions are valid only for that particular period and nothing more than that. So the best solution for you is to give time bound access rights. So when you're giving permissions to users to access certain resources, then you set a time period, you set a valid expiry period for that permissions. And then once that particular time is expired, or when once that time is has lapsed, then the users should not ideally have permissions to access those resources. So that is how you can ensure that over the time users don't accumulate all those access rights that are no longer necessary. And let's say when those users have um, let's say left the organization, and that's a stale account, and a stale account is not cleaned up, then someone could get access to that particular account and then log in and gain access to, or gain control over all these important resources and data. And you might be left wondering, how did a regular user get access to so much of information? And privilege creep is what caused it, right? So moving to the next one. So be it when you're making changes, there are chances that these user when when user modification happens on a day-to-day basis, there are chances that you make certain mistakes when you're doing. And if you're doing it for a large number of users, and when you're doing it on a regular basis, it can get tiresome. And what happens is, there are, let's say you accidentally delete an important object, or you make a modification which is not supposed to be done. So you're modifying the properties of a user account, which completely which is not in align with that organization, with that user's role. Then you need a backup plan. You need a backup and a recovery solution, which will help you kind of uh, you know uh, bring back the sorry which will help you at least uh, take a step back and then understand, okay, here, this is the mistake that I did, but yes, I have a solution for that, and that is having a backup and recovery solution. Now, I have this interesting data from a Forrester market study, which says that the downtime caused by ransomware or vengeful employees or other threats can cost an estimated $100,000 $100,000 to $3.5 million per hour. So this is based on the type of businesses. So that's, let's say not having a backup or a recovery solution can damage or even break businesses, right? So business that are trying to recover from malicious threats or even honest mistakes. So I have this report right here that you can see from the figure. It says that most of 51% of the time, the organizations find accidental or unintentional insiders are major threats to the organization. And 55% of the time, the privileged users or users having more than high level privileges, these are the users who kind of put your organization's cybersecurity posture at a risk. So what can you do to avoid that? When you make a change, the change is and the change is not supposed to be, is not an ideal change, then you need some way to come out of that, and that's where a backup solution will help you. So a backup solution will basically uh, store every single data, every single attribute value, and it'll have a record of every change that has been made. And when you want to restore from that particular data, you can just go back and then restore from the most latest backup or the correct backup, right? So I'll show you how you can do that as well. Moving to the next one. Right. So I have been saying that, when users' roles change, like, moving to a different team or moving to a different location, their properties have to be changed. And there are, like, let's say if you're doing this on a day-to-day basis, this can be quite difficult. And dealing with these user modification requests can be kind of cumbersome if, let's say, you have users moving from department A to department B. Now, a lot of things will change. The reporting manager, the contact attributes, the permission, the group memberships of that particular user, all of the all of this has to be modified, right? So when you're doing this, and let's say you do not have like a proper change mechanism in place for that, it can get complicated. So let's say an IT administrator is making for a user A, he's being moved to department A to department B, and he's making all these changes to that particular user. Another user B arrives, so he has to again make the change for, let's say, if he's promoted from one particular role to another role, then he has to make a lot of changes. So, and let's say if there is no proper a checklist that he can look and then perform all these actions, it can get quite complex. But how do you tackle that? So for that, we can have something called as a template. Now, as the name suggests, template is basically, it's going to be like a backbone, and you'll have everything defined, so everything in its place, and all you have to do is just apply the template. So when it comes to modifying a user attribute or modifying the properties of a single user, all you have to do is just apply the template, and all those properties of that user is modified, which is relevant to or which is suitable to the new department or the new role or the new location that he's being moved into. Now, I can show you a demonstration of what this template is. So if you're not familiar with AD Manager Plus, this might seem new to you, this might seem strange, but I'll give you a demo on what a template is. It's very simple. Creating a template and then applying a template, and how all you can use this template to make your user modification and your user creation, and similarly other objects, not just it's not restricted to just users. For other objects like groups, contacts, if you want to make changes and you want to do it for in one go, then template is your solution, and I'll show you how you can do that, right? So what we did was we basically covered some of the challenges that IT administrators face. And next part of the webinar is I'll be telling you how AD Manager Plus can help you achieve that and create a change management plan in place, so that whatever changes are being thrown at you, and you're completely prepared for that. Right. So I've been talking about AD Manager Plus for some time, but I have not, maybe if you're not familiar with the tool, let me give you a quick introduction of what the tool is. So the tool, like I said in the beginning, is an Active Directory management and reporting tool. And when it comes to, so it's not just restrictive to AD. So you can provision users in AD, Office 365, Exchange, Skype for Business, and G Suite all at one go. So it is like a single web-based console where you enter important user details and just select these platforms that you want to create the user object in, and then just hit create. So the tool will automatically create user accounts in all these platforms at one go. And when it comes to reports, there is absolutely no need to rely on PowerShell scripts or any sort of scripting to retrieve information on AD objects. So be it user reports or password related reports, or exchange, or licenses, or the groups, the group memberships of the report, the security groups, the nested groups, all of that you can fetch that without making any effort. So we have around 180 predefined reports. So we have a huge report library, and they're all categorized based on the type. So users, passwords, OUs, groups, all of that. And then you can just hit on generate button for any of that report, and it'll fetch the most up-to-date information from AD, and that result will be displayed. Moreover, you want to export that particular report into PDF or an HTML or a CSV format, you can do that as well. And let's say you do not want those reports to be sent like generated every single time. Instead, you want the reports to be sent to your inbox. Let's say certain specific reports. Let's say you want to get a list of users who have been inactive for 90 days and you want that result to be sent to your inbox, let's say every week, so that you can go ahead and perform a cleanup if necessary. Then you can do so. So we have a report scheduling capability as well, and this will make your managing your user objects very easy, right? Moving on, when it comes to stale account cleanup or user provisioning or deprovisioning, you do not want to spend time with that. Instead, you want the tool to take care of that. Then all you have to do is just configure an automation policy. Now, when it comes to AD cleanup, so when it comes to AD cleanup, so let's say you want to perform a list of actions like AD, clearing the group memberships of that particular user, or moving them to a different OU, removing the licenses that are associated to that particular user object, and all of that. You can just configure a deprovisioning policy and then just choose an automated as in you can just choose a time and a date and the tool will take care of that. And also, if you want to, so the last two topics is what we'll be seeing today in depth, because that's where we spoke about in the first two cases, which is protecting AD from unauthorized changes and then configuring a tight access control. So when you're delegating actions to technicians or tasks to technicians, we're just going to make it really simple, and this is like a non-invasive form of delegation. So whatever permissions that you're delegating to the technicians, it's just restrictive to the AD Manager Plus tool alone. So that technicians' permissions in AD is completely unaltered, untouched. So it's just restricted to the tool, right? And when you're delegating, there are ways in which you can granularly give permissions. So I'll show you how you can do that. And you can also monitor the task, like what is the status of this particular request. Is it approved, is it reviewed, and you can make sure that whatever change that you're making goes through this uh, review process and then only it's executed. That's where the topic workflow comes. So that is the last one, right? Moving on to the next one, right? So from here onwards, what we'll be doing is I will be showing you the tool, so what you can do. And so we'll be going from step, the cases that I listed in the beginning, so in the same order. So how can you protect AD from unauthorized changes? So having a multi-level approval workflow is going to solve that. And you can establish, like basically in every action that you're carrying out, be it user creation or be it deleting users or just raising a request for changing a user's group memberships, all of that you can put that as a request, and that request, whatever that you're specifying, will go through a review mechanism. So it'll be reviewed and approved. If it's okay, it'll be like processed to the process to the next stage. If not, it'll be deleted, and then you can review what is wrong with that request, and then you can attempt to raise the request again with the correct data. So let me show you how that's done. So I'm logging on to the tool right here. So this is my local instance. We also have this demo set up online. So I will be sharing that link in the chat window. And let me quickly share the link. So this is the demo setup, which is available all the time. You can try these today as we go about the session, or you can just try that once the session ends. Once we send you a playlist, then you can take a look at this demo setup and try the actions that I've shown here, right? So I'm logging in. Right, so this is the first thing that you see when you log in. So right. So this is the dashboard, which can be customized. So this will just give you a quick overview of what is happening. So how many inactive users, inactive computers, groups, empty groups, so you can go ahead and manage those objects from the dashboard itself. So this is just to give you an understanding, just to give you an overview, but you have to, if you want to get detailed reports, then you have to go to the reports tab to gather information. Now, let me just give you a quick just a quick overview of what the tool is, how the layout is if you're not familiar with the tool. So we have the home button, which is on the top, which is the dashboard right here. And then right next to it, we have the AD management, which has all the management actions related operations for AD objects. Then right next to it is the AD reports, which contains over 180 predefined reports. And the Office 365 tab contains the management and the reporting aspects of Office 365, be it licenses, be it groups, everything, and AD delegation and workflow. So we'll be seeing a little bit of AD delegation and workflow in today's session. And in delegation, like I said, you will be creating a technician, you'll be assigning him a role to that technician. And in workflow, this is where we review, we establish a review process. So I'll start with this and then we'll see the rest of the tabs. So this is the first one. So you can see that this is a business workflow, and these are some of the default workflows that has been created. So when you download the tool, when you're installing the tool, it comes default with that tool. And here, this is where you specify the structure of your workflow. Now you can enter a name, a description, and you can see these are different stages, right, in a workflow. So there's a requester who's raising a request. Let me give you a simple example of an HR who is raising a request for user creation, right? So 10 new employees have joined the organization and he's raising a request. So in as a requester, as an HR, he just will have he'll just enter some the unique attribute values of those users, like for example his first name, last name, his employee ID, all those values he will enter it in a form. And and then so there's an option where you can, if you see on the top right corner, there's a single user creation, bulk user creation. You can see some options that are listed here. Now if you want to create request, you can see that there's a create request right here. So there you have a lot of options as well. So this is this just lists some top management actions alone. And so the request, the HR executive is entering all those details and he's raising a request, right? So here, you as an IT administrator, when it comes to user onboarding, you want a certain process to be followed. So you can add 2 reviewers, right? Or 2 approvers, or you can just have 1 reviewer alone, or you can just have 1 approver alone. So however, you can completely customize this, and you can have an executor, which will be an IT administrator who will be processing the request. Now, when an HR executive is raising a request, that request will go to his manager, the HR manager who's probably reviewing it, assessing it, and the request will also be sent to, let's say, the team for which the user is being hired to. So that team manager, so he can also approve it and then take a look at the details and give a green signal to that. So once it's approved in these stages, then it goes to the executor, and then only the IT administrator will actually create the user, right? So this is for user creation. So similarly, for modifying a user, creating a group, so many actions you can perform using this workflow. The most important part is none of the actions that you're performing, even by, let's say, the smallest one. Let's say here you have a user password reset. So even something as small but important is, can be put through a workflow, right? So all the actions can be documented, and then you can get a track all these requests. And then let's say if you are a reviewer, or if you are an approver, you can review or approve that request, and then it will be passed on to the executive. executor. Right. So you might wonder, so how do I add an HR executive as a requester, or how do I add the HR manager as a reviewer, a team manager as an approver? So right here on the LHS, we have workflow delegation. So under that, we have requesters, reviewers, approvers, executors, right? So if you click on that, you have options to add new requester. So you can just click on add new requester, and this will give you options to choose the domain. So when you click on select requester, it basically gives a list of all the users, groups, and OUs in that domain, and you can choose a role, right? What is that role? Whether it's a user creation or a reset password, you can go ahead and select that role and then click save. And you can also further refine this by choosing which OU alone this particular user has permission to perform this action or raise a request for that action. You can do that and click save. Similarly, for reviewers, for approvers and executors, you can do the same thing. You can add any number of users as reviewers, any number of users as approvers. But when it comes to business workflow, in one particular workflow, you can add up to 5 reviewers and you can add up to 5 approvers. So let's say if you have 2 reviewers, then only after both the reviewers review the request and then passes it on to the approver, uh, I'm sorry. So only if both the reviewers review the request, then only that particular request will be passed on to the approver for the approver's decision, right? So that's how it works. So you can add up to 5 reviewers and up to 5 approvers. So that's workflow. So you can see that this, when you're enforcing something like that, you can be assured that any change that you're making in terms of your users or your computers or your group memberships, it's all documented, and there are very less chances that something could go wrong and the permissions that are granted are not authorized, and this will just completely take care of that aspect. Right. Moving to the second one, which is how to configure tight access control. Now, this is where we'll be talking about delegation. Now, when you're delegating a user or a technician some role, there are ways in which you can do that using AD Manager Plus. So when you're giving permissions to just create a request, create a user, or reset a password, or just lists the permission to view certain reports only. So this will make sure that when that particular technician logs on to AD Manager Plus, he will not be able to see anything but just those actions that are assigned to him. So let me quickly show you that. So coming to AD Delegation tab. So on the LHS, this is where we can add technicians, we can add roles. So the first one, help desk technician. So you click on add new technician, and this will just list the users and groups in your domain, and you can add them as technician. And this is where you assign a technician a certain role. Now, where do I create this role? We have help desk roles here on the LHS. So if I click that and I click on create new role, this is where I basically define what all permissions that technician has, what all actions he can perform, what all he can view, all of that, right? So even let's say when I'm giving a permission for a technician to create user, and when I select this option, right? So be it create single user, create bulk, so I can give that alone, or modify single user, any of that. So here, right? So here you can choose what all attributes that the technician can edit or enter. So when I'm clicking on this option, so basically this lists all the important default attributes in our tool. And let's say if uh, you do not want this technician to have access to any other attributes except the general attributes, right? So I do not want that user to technician to edit the terminal service properties or link or account properties, then or exchange for that matter. So I can just select the ones that I want alone. So general attributes, the OU, the template, the first name, last name, all of that. But I do not want any of the rest of the attributes to be editable. Then you can like choose what I have done. And in this general attributes, I do not want him this particular user to choose a template or the specify the office or employee ID, something like that. Then you can go ahead and choose just using these check boxes and then click OK, right? Similarly, if you want to reset a user password, you can see that there are options right next to it as well. So do you want that technician to, have permission to set this value? Like, at least have the permission for him to select this checkbox or deselect. None of that options must be available to him. Then you can just leave that, right? So let's say I can just give permission for that technician to set a password, and that to a random password, but because you do not want the technician to know what that user's password he has, then you can choose this option as well. So similarly, you can see that there are options right next to every action right here. So this is again a way in which you can break it down and then make this very, very specific. And even when it comes to, so this is user management section. Similarly, when it comes to computer or contact or group, you can do the same, right? Or when it comes to AD reports, you can select reports. And when you do so, do you want all these reports to be listed? No, I just want one report, or I just want let's say all users report and not password reports, just users report. Then I can do that as well. Now when this technician logs into AD Manager Plus to actually carry out that action, the UI is going to be completely different. It is going to be very much different from the UI that you're seeing. So the options that we have selected are um, create single user, create bulk user, reset password, and in reports, he can see all users. These are the only actions that he can see. So let me give you a quick view of how, so this is the AD management tab, right? So when that, this is how it looks to an IT administrator, right? So I have admin privileges, I have logged in, and you can see that I have ton of access to ton of these actions and I can perform any of these. Now when that technician logs in, he can see only create single user, create bulk user, and reset password in this whole tab, right? Rest of them will all be hidden. So there's no way in which he can perform any action and then make changes in any of these objects that are not, that the permissions that are not delegated to him. So similarly, when it comes to AD reports, he will be able to see only all users report, which is what is defined in the role, right? So this is how you can ensure that every action that you're performing, every permission that you're delegating is very, very very narrow, and you've narrowed it down, and it's very restrictive, and you can be at ease because there is no way this technician can perform any action that is not delegated to him, because the tool just does not give him the option to see any of those actions or perform any of those actions, right? So that is how AD delegation works. Now, if you want to keep track of all these actions that are performed by technicians, it only makes sense to know that, hey, I want to know which technician performed this action, or what are the list of actions performed by this particular technician. Then you have a audit report to take care of that. So it lists the technician's name, what is the action, and when was it done, what is the, so here it's create bulk user, so what is the user's name, whether it's a success or a failure, it's an error, then it'll also show an error code so you can troubleshoot. So you can just choose whichever help desk technician that you want, and then just hit go. So you can specify the period and then hit go. Again, we can schedule these reports. Let's see, you do not want to log into the tool and then generate this report every single time, but instead you want it to be scheduled. So this is where you can schedule this report. You can choose this report to be scheduled to be sent to your inbox, let's say on a weekly basis or on a daily basis, monthly, whichever works for you. And admin audit report will give you what all actions you have performed, you as an administrator have performed. Like, have I created a tech, what all, so what are the technicians that I've created? Did I assign So what is the role that is assigned to a technician? So this is just to give you an understanding of what all actions that you as administrators or IT administrators performed if you're all using, if there are a few of you within your organization, all of you using the same tool, and if you have logged in, what all changes have you performed, right? So, and whether you've created a technician, whether you have added a role, all of that, you can get a complete a report right here. So this is how AD delegation will ensure or will make sure that whatever changes, whatever actions that you're performing is just comes with a sort of a boundary and a control mechanism, and there's no chance that a user will perform or a technician will perform action that he is not given permission to do so, right? Moving on to how to avoid privilege creep. So like I said, when you're accumulating all these permissions over time, when a user is given a lot of permissions and it's not being revoked or it's being reviewed, it can get really difficult when you have to go ahead and check all these permissions individually. It's almost impossible to do that, because it's one thing, it's going to be a lot of effort on your end, and to find out where, which permission, which user, it's going to be really really difficult. So that is why we need to have like a time based or a temporary access rights mechanism. So you can do that. So we have the same you I'm sorry. So you can do that using workflow. Now, I was showing you the create request option earlier. So in that we have user modification option. So I'm going to select that. Now, let's say a user is raising a request to gain access to some particular folder, right? So the user or his manager can log in and then raise a request to do so. So add to group, right? So if I click on this plus sign, it will just list all the groups in that domain, and I'm just choosing two groups here. And this is where I set the uh, type. So I want user A to be added to these two groups for one day or a specific day. So if it's on a specific day, then I can select it from the calendar, and you can choose the time. And here, or it's one day, I can just do that for let's say. Now but let me quickly clarify one thing. Now let's say you're raising a user request, so I'm setting the duration as one day. What is the subject? Now which user you want to give this permission to, as in which user you want to be added to that group. Then when you create a request, this request will go through a workflow mechanism. So there will be a bunch of people who's reviewing your request, and then if it looks good, it'll be executed, right? So when it's executed, and in this case by execution, it means the user will be added to that particular group, right? So when from from that point onwards, so when that particular event happens, from that point onwards, the user will be a part of that group for one day, right? From that particular day and date, not when the user is or when the request is created. So the tool will take into account after the administrator will execute the task. From that particular moment for 24 hours, that this user that you have specified will be a part of that particular group. And then after that, the user will be automatically removed from those groups. So this is completely automatic, and you do not have to like intervene at all. So you just leave this mechanism for the tool to take care of. The tool will make sure that the user is added to that group for a day, and then after the day, after that period ends, the user will be removed from that group. So this is a really good way to uh, avoid this privilege creep, and also it also reduces your work, right? And similarly, when you're giving folder permissions as well, you can set the subject, what is the request, setting a folder permission, choose a domain, and here you can choose the folder. So this will just give you a list of computers, and then you can choose a folder, and here you can select the name, and what is the permission that you want that user to have. So let's say I want user to have just read permissions, or read and execute permission, or any of these advanced permission. You can select and do that. And here again you can set the duration, whether it's 30 minutes or for 1 hour, 2 hours, 1 day, or a specific day. So once you set that, then once this task is executed, the user will have permission to access the resources that you have specified in in the folders that you've selected, and after that the access will be revoked. So this is how you can avoid privilege creep. How to reverse accidental changes and deletions. Now, when you're performing actions and when you're doing a lot of management actions, there could be data entry errors. You're making some change, you made a change which is not right, and you want to quickly fix it, and you do not know, or when you're doing it and then when you're doing a set of actions and then you realize quite later that you made some changes. Instead, instead of you manually going and then checking every user that you created or every user that you modified, what is the attribute value that you gave there, should I edit it, should I modify it, how, which, on which day did I do it. So this can get really messy. So how do you avoid that, right? How do you make sure that every action that is performed, every change that is made is backed up? And in case of anything like deleting a user object by accident or modifying the user properties, you can just make use of a backup and a recovery solution, right? So let me quickly take you to the backup solution. So here we have a backup. This is a very new feature. It was introduced just a couple of months back. So this is pretty new. Now let me take you to the settings and show you what all options we have here. So you can select which all OUs you want to back up, whether it's just this particular OU or these all of these OUs, or just a specific OU, because I have like OUA has important security user sorry, top level security groups and important administrative accounts. Then that particular OU alone you can back up, because you cannot afford to lose that data, right? So another thing is, let's say you can also choose which all objects you want to back up, whether users or computers. And even if you're selecting those categories, then you can also select which all attribute values that you want to back up. So I just want important attribute values, let's say member of, or direct reports, or manager, or primary group ID, all of those attribute values to be backed up. Then I can do that as well. All I have to do is just simply select the check boxes right here, right? So, and when do you want full backups to happen? Do you want to schedule it on the first of every month at this particular time? You can do that. Or or you want to do it in or during weekends, because non-business hours, you do not want anything to interrupt your a regular working day. You can do that as well. So you can specify that. Now when it comes to full backup, the problem is the full backup happens only once in a month. So if you do not have changes for, let's say, a month, or it just takes into account what is the latest change when this particular backup is happening, that's not a good way to go about it. That's not efficient at all. And that's when you have the incremental backup. Now what does an incremental backup do? So there is no scenario where the changes does not happen on daily basis, it happens only on monthly basis to your user objects. No, that does not happen. So every time a user object or a computer object or any of the AD objects properties are modified, a user created or user deleted, group memberships altered, the content attributes modified, so anytime some change like that happens, then the tool will detect that change and it will be recorded. So there will be the full backup which will happen every month on the stipulated date and time. and there'll be an incremental backup which can happen. You can set it to be a daily backup or a weekly backup, so based on the nature of your organization. If it's a large organization with a lot of changes happening, and that it's in a constant state of change, then you can schedule in daily backups. So daily backups will take into account all those changes alone, and for the objects that do not have any change, it'll be retained as such. But the objects that undergo some change, then that attribute value, what is the attribute value, what is when was the change made, all of that will be backed up, right? So that is how you can ensure that you do not miss out on any changes. And if you want to revert to some version that you would like, and let's say a version of, or let's say the attribute value which was uh, updated last week, and you want to revert to that, so this is where an incremental backup will help you. And you can choose the backup time, and you do not want to store a lot of backups, full backups, because of storage space issues. I want only last 12 backups. You can do that as well. So this is how you can configure backup. And when you are restoring user objects also, I want to restore a user object as it is. So when you're restoring an object, all the attribute values that from the latest backup can be restored. You can also choose from which backup, which attribute value you want to restore. That is also possible. So we have granular restore, where it'll just list all the backups of that particular user object. What was the attribute value? So if you can see, so this is, we just have one backup because I had initiated only one backup. So if there are multiple backups, it'll just show all the versions, and then it'll show the attribute value, what is the backup value, what is the current value, all of that. And then if you want to select a certain value, like if you feel that the previous version is not the correct version, instead, or instead the version before that is more accurate, then you can choose that as well. So this is how you can ensure that even when you're backing up, or when you're restoring user objects, it's not like one size fits all mechanism sometimes does not work, because maybe the last backup value values are incorrect, and maybe the values that was before the previous backup, that was before the latest backup, you can specifically just go ahead and pick those attribute values alone, and then those attribute values will be backed up. So this is how you can make sure that even if you're making any changes without by accident, and then you want to quickly cover them up, you can quickly get back your system on track, the process and back on track using our backup. So this, even with, let's say, a cyber attack like a ransomware, so which is basically encrypting all your data, and then your data is lost and you have to restore them, this is where you can come and then get back all your information. Right, moving to, so we were talking about user modification changes at length, right? So when you're moving, when you're managing user properties, there are a lot of chances that users values are being changed. Let's say users being moved, users being promoted. It's going to be really difficult if you're going to address all those individual changes. So that is why a template will help you. So let me show you where the template is. When you click on management, user management, we have user creation, user modification. And since we are on the subject of user modification, I'll quickly show you what a template looks like. So this is how this template layout that you can see is very similar to that of a creation layout. Like creating a user will have pretty much the same layout. Now, what is different here, right? So when you are creating a template for marketing department, you can just enter the template name as marketing department for this particular region, and you can set all these attribute values and then hit save, right? And when you're modifying a user, you can just apply the template. So let me show you how you can do that. So I'm modifying a single user, and so let's say I'm modifying this user. I click on modify user. So when I click on modify user, it'll basically show all the attributes of that particular user. So this is where you can change that. So when I click on change, it'll list all the uh, modification templates that I have. And let's say if you have a marketing template, department template, then you can just click that and click OK. And once you do that and click on update user right here, then all those attribute values will be modified. Let me also show you another option that we have in templates. So that is really important here, because if you want to create a department, or if you want to create a template for, let's say, marketing department, or you want to create a template for finance, IT, so you do not have any restrictions when it comes to creating templates in AD Manager Plus. So you can create any number of templates that you want. But rather than creating multiple templates, you can actually create one template and you can apply it wherever necessary. So that is where modification rules come into picture. So you can see on the right hand side, I've uh, I've selected modification rules, and this is where I can create a new rule. So let's say a user is being moved from one department, right, to IT department. So I'm setting that as a condition, right? So when that is done, and after that, let's say when the department is IT, I want the description to be IT. Or when I want uh, if the department is IT, then he has to belong to, let's say, I'm just selecting few groups here and then click OK, right? So similarly, I want to change the manager to this user, just selecting sample user. So I click add. So do you see what I'm doing? What I'm doing is defining a logic. So if the department is IT, then all these attribute values are changed according to that, right? So similarly, I can change, add multiple conditions here. So when the office is just okay, so you can populate any values here. So you can configure that. So if the user, the office is, let's say, US region, you can select that. Or if the a title is this, then you can set corresponding values here. So rather than creating multiple templates to do so, and when you are modifying an attribute, modifying a user using this template, the tool will immediately detect, okay, what is the change? Is the department IT? Oh, in that case, all these attribute values will be changed. Is the office US? Then all these attribute will be changed. So similarly, I can add multiple values here. I can add multiple conditions here, and this will just make it easier for you when it comes to managing, user modification requests. So rather than you going ahead and then, like I showed you earlier, clicking on modify single user, clicking on a user object, and then manually entering those attribute values, you can do that. You can do that using a CSV file as well. A template is going to give you a much easier way to handle that. So I can just enter the values here manually, or I can just import a CSV file with all those relevant attribute values, or I can use a template. And the template and the CSV values, CSV file import will be one of the easier ones to do. And the template is, since you can add rules to it, you can customize the templates based on your requests, and it can be a one-time activity. So let's say you're creating a template. Anytime you want to create users, you want to modify users, all you have to do is just apply the template and all those attribute values will be auto-populated. So there is no need for you to go and configure each of those users properties. So that brings us to the last one for today. So that was the end of the last topic. So before I conclude the session, so I would like to just share a couple of two poll questions, in fact. So I'll be launching a poll question, so you'll be able to see that on your screen. So I'll give you 30 seconds to answer that question, and then I'll launch the next question, and then we'll conclude our session. So launching first question. So that is, thank you for answering the first question. I'll quickly launch the second question. I hope you can see the second question on the screen now. Great. Thank you so much for answering our questions. So that brings us to the end of today's session. Right. So if you have any questions, I'll be available online, so you can make use of the chat window and then let me know. And if you have any questions related to the product, in case if you're new to the product and you do not have an idea of what the tool is about, hopefully this session gave you a little bit of understanding of how the tool functions. But again, what I've covered today is a very small portion of the capabilities of the tool. So it's quite a an extensive feature set that we have in AD Manager Plus. And if you would like to know a lot about or know more about AD Manager Plus, then you can always contact our support team. You can schedule a free demo. And if you want like a product walkthrough, we can do that. And we also have a lot of workshops and webinars which are specific to product as well. And you can always sign up to them just to learn or to get an understanding about the product. So thank you so much for joining for our today's session. And I hope you found this session useful. So thank you once again and have a nice day.